Good morning, everybody. How's it going? Glad you guys are here this morning. My name is Steven. This is Alicia. This is Jamie. We get to lead kind of the music portion of service this morning. Usually what I say before we sing is everything we do at Shock is optional. So nothing's mandatory. So don't feel like you have to sing or stand up. And obviously you guys can kind of tell the setup's a little different this morning. So feel free to kind of situate wherever you're at and grab donuts, grab coffee, and we're gonna get started this morning. A refuge for the poor. Refuge for the poor, shelter from the storm. This is our God. She will wipe away your tears and redeem the painful years. This is our God. Oh, 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 oh. This is our God. Mother to the orphan, healer to the broken. This is our God. She brings peace to our madness, comfort in our sadness. This is our God. Oh, 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 this is our God. You are the hope. You are the hope we have waited for. You brought us in never closed the door. You filled the lost with your love before. Oh, 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 this is our God. Homes for the thirsty, bread for the lonely. This is our God. She protects all the voiceless, fights for justice. This is our God. Oh, 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 this is our God. Love. You are the hope we have waited for. You promised it never closed the door. You filled the lost with love before. Oh, 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 this is our God. You are the hope. You are the hope we have waited for. You promised it never closed the door. You filled the lost with love before. Oh, 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 this is our God. Oh, 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 this is our God. Oh my gosh, I love drums. It just gives me more energy, right?
It's 2 in the morning, I'm still awake in my bed. And I
Amazing. Hi, everyone. You might have noticed the chairs are a little different. We're trying some new things, so if you don't like this style, you can give all your complaints to Dottie in the back, just not me. I'm just kidding. You can come to me as well. Hi, everyone. My name is Donna, and I am one of the pastors here. Hi, live stream, for those who are tuning in on live stream, and welcome to Safe Harbor. For those of you who are new, we use the acronym SHOC by saying shock, like a shock to the system, like a shock to the church system. And so if you hear the word shock or Safe Harbor, that's just me interchangeably using our name. For those of you who are new and you're like, I need to use the restroom, but you don't know where to go, if you go out these double doors, and you can go anytime, you do not need to just wait for someone to stop talking like myself and go. You can go anytime. Go out these double doors. You'll turn and see a custodian closet over in the far distance open. Next to said custodian closet are the bathrooms. Yes, they are a journey. I'm so sorry about that. But at the end of your journey, you will find bathrooms, and that is what is important. So those are there for you. For those of you who are tuning into our new series, we're actually, you might notice, there are kid toys and kids over here in the corner. We are trying something with our Children's Bible Story series, and Dottie will talk about that series in a minute here, where we're giving children space to stay with us during story time. So yes, we will be reading the Children's Bible today that we have for you during our series, and then afterwards, kids, that's my son right there being held by Aaron. He's so cute. And Sophia, then you can go into the kids' room and play or discuss the story with your kids' ministry leaders. All right. So with that, I'm going to invite Dottie up to get us started. Dottie, round of applause. Okay, you don't need applause. It's fine. Good morning. How's it going? Good. Yeah, it's a good. We made it to February. Hallelujah. January was rough. Does anyone else feel that way? I'm relieved to be in a new month. I was saying every year, I enter into January with so much joy and hopeful anticipation, and every year I'm disappointed in January. Like, this is the worst month. All right, enough of that. We are going to talk about this story in Genesis. If you were here 2 weeks ago, you heard the story of creation. So there is the Bible. We are looking at the Bible through the lens of these really awesome, inclusive authors that have written the Book of Belonging for little kids. And we're using this as a way to reimagine some of these stories in the Bible and to just engage with them in a playful, fun way. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created. And it was a story of creation and rhythm and a story of belonging. God breathes and God creates, and it's just so awesome. And it's all about everything's created and everything belongs. So we're still going to be in that very first book in the Bible called Genesis. And we're going to travel into a story that happens after there's people, there is the spread of civilization, there's a lot of back and forth with people and God and disappointment. And we are arriving to a story where there's this one particular family that God is very, very hopeful will carry on the story of belonging. And this next part is Abraham and Sarah. So has anyone heard the song, Father Abraham? Yes, that's the Abraham we're talking about. Okay, so do we have someone on slides? Yes. Okay, thanks, Phil. So we'll hop over a couple more. Yes. Okay, not here yet. We're not at that story quite yet, so we can go. Yes, thanks, Phil. So Abraham and Sarah are these people that God was like, you are the ones that are gonna carry on my name. And God makes a covenant with Abraham. So a lot of us, if we've grown up in the church, are pretty familiar with the name Abraham, right? Even the song, it's like a very popular thing. So God makes a covenant and says, in this covenant, I'm calling Abraham and Sarah to leave their homeland, and they're going to receive land, blessing, and a legacy. And then the classic Bible verse, Genesis 15:5, that their descendants will be as numerous as the stars. So this is God's promise to Abraham, and the word covenant is really, really particular here. And this is the relationship that ultimately establishes God's connection with Israel. So for those of you that know of Israel in the Bible, Abraham is the grandfather of the person Jacob that gets called Israel. So there's a lot of connections with this covenant that then creates the great nation of Israel. We're going to hold how complicated that is this morning. Even just me saying Israel, right? In these times. So, a key part to this covenant was that Abraham and Sarah had to have a child. That was key to if they were going to carry on God's legacy, if they were going to have so many descendants, if they were going to just create this great nation, they had to have babies. Now, Abraham and Sarah weren't able to have a child. This is the point in the story, I probably should have done this at the very beginning, where I just want to do a quick trigger warning. This story that we're about to talk about involves sexual violence, exploitation, slavery. It's a really nasty story. I'm really hopeful of how we're going to interpret it this morning and recenter some people in this story. But before we do, if you are someone where you just might need a little bit more TLC, you might need to just, I don't know, grab an extra donut or walk the neighborhood, that is all good. We also have markers and paper if you want to go color. I like distractions during service, so please, by all means, take care of yourself as you need to. So we'll get back to the story. So Abraham and Sarah are not able to have a child. And they decide to use their slave, Hagar, or Hagar, it's pronounced different depending on what circles you're in. They decide to use their slave, Hagar. Abraham sleeps with her, probably without her consent, and she becomes pregnant. And that for them is how they're going to create their legacy of creating a great nation. Starts with exploitation and them misusing Hagar. And so Hagar becomes pregnant, and Sarah, Abraham's wife, is really upset, jealous, and she abuses her. And it's at this point we're going to hear now. So part of, if you've been here before, if you've heard me even talk about Hagar, you know she is our hero of this story. So as we look at this story, she's going to be the one that we center. And Donna's going to read it from the Book of Belonging now.
All right. Thanks, Dot. Okay. Kids, Sophia and James, I'm going to sit right here, and you are welcome to gather around me as I read a bedtime story. No, I'm kidding. As I read a story. And for everyone else, the story's on the screen. If you are interested in this type of book after you hear this story, this is what it looks like. You can get it on Amazon, Bookshop, anywhere of the sort. They did not pay me to say that, but
Donna, I forgot to say one thing about the
Yes.
story. Okay, so as you're setting up, / you're already set up. Okay, so the point in this story is Hagar has been abused and she flees to the wilderness. And she has a couple different times where she's in the wilderness, and the way that this author is telling the story is merging those wilderness stories of her wilderness experience. And yeah, so that's where we are.
amazing. Thank you, Dot. Okay. So this is titled The God Who Sees, and it's from Genesis 16 and 21. That's right, James. Yushmael, also called Ishmael, and Yizek, also called Isaac, Sarai, also called Sarah, and Abraham, also called Abraham. The young woman gripped her son's hand and staggered across the sand with every sinking step. Her heavy heart sank too. I just want to go home. I miss my family. I just want to belong again. She squinted against the setting sun and imagined the welcome they received when they got back to Egypt. How good it would be to smell her native dishes, to feel her mother's tongue, to hear her true name spoken. They took away my name, she sobbed into her mother's shoulder. They just call me Hagar, the alien, the foreign one, the stranger. She had been gone for many years, enslaved in Sarai's or Sarah's tent. So much had happened. Even though God chose Sarah and Abraham to start God's great family of belonging, they forgot God's promises. Instead of waiting, they tried to grab what God could give, was giving. They forced Hagar to start a family with Abraham. Abraham named their son Ishmael and loved him dearly. But then God's promise to Sarah was at last fulfilled. Sarah had a baby of her own and named him Isaac. 2 sons, 1 promise. Then Isaac and Ishmael were old enough to argue. Sarah saw what the future would be. So once again, she grabbed for God's gifts by sending Hagar and Ishmael away. Get rid of that slave woman and her son. That woman's son will never share in Isaac's inheritance. Sarah's shout still rang in Hagar's and Ishmael's ears as they stumbled through the sand. They felt unnamed, unnecessary, unwanted. God's family of belonging had cast out one of their own. They trudged for days through the wilderness toward Egypt. The food and water ran out. The young woman's strength and hope wore thin. Finally, she laid Ishmael in the shade of a small bush, weeping as she noticed his cracked lips and shallow breaths. Stumbling a few feet away, she felt despair pull her to the ground. She heard Ishmael crying weakly and felt her chest filled with fear and sorrow. We just want to go home, she thought. Don't be afraid, came a voice from heaven, cool and refreshing, and on her wind-worn skin, I hear Ishmael crying, the voice continued. I see you have been crushed by cruelty and injustice, but I'm with you. Go lift up your son and hold him close. I have big plans for him. God spoke true and beautiful names over the woman and her son, promising them hope and abundance. I didn't bring you here to die. I brought you here to live freely. Ishmael is not doomed or forgotten. He will build his own family of belonging. With many descendants, he will be noble and free like the wild donkeys that roam the desert. And it was exactly what the mother needed to hear for her son. It was exactly what she needed to hear for herself. After years of feeling unnamed and forgotten, here was her belonging. God showed her a well, and she rushed to fetch a drink for Ishmael, sobbing with relief. She turned to God and spoke true and beautiful words back. And your name is El Roy, the God who sees me. I've seen the God who sees me. They took away my name, but you remembered me. I was enslaved, but now I am free. And God did see her. God was with her and Ishmael as the boy grew up. They settled in the wilderness and created their own family of belonging. The end. Kids, you are more than welcome to go in the kids' room now. And James, you can discuss the story with your family leaders. No kidding, you can go play. And the rest of us adults will also go to the, no kidding. Also, we'll stay here. So.
Thank you, yay, that was awesome. Okay, I love kids' stories. Most of you know, I'm a mom, so I read kids' books all the time throughout the day, and they capture so much of what's happening. We are going to talk about this story. So you are in the funky seating we've got going on because we are experimenting right now with turning to our neighbors. We've actually been doing this for like 6 months, It's been a while. Because again, I like distractions, I like breaks. I don't want to just listen to a sermon for a long time. So you're going to turn to your neighbors if you're up to it, and you're going to talk about some of these questions that we have. Slide. No, it's okay. Have you heard of Abraham in the Bible? If so, what have you heard about him? What are your thoughts now about Abraham? What are some of the dominant narratives? And Hagar names God. What name would you give God? based on your experiences. Just a fun thing to play with. You're gonna turn to your neighbors, so maybe a group of 3 or 4. If you are here and you're not feeling social, show me what you do. Thumbs down. Yes, if you're not feeling social, give your neighbors a thumbs down. They won't talk to you. If you are here and you only want to talk to the person next to you, just go like, we're just going to talk us two, and that's great. Okay, so we'll talk for a couple minutes and we'll come back and talk about the story some more. Okay, take the next minute to wrap up. And maybe if there's someone in your group that hasn't shared, invite them to share if they would like. If they don't want to share, that's okay too. Okay, wrap it up. Come on back when you're ready. That was a really interesting one to catch snippets of some of y'all's conversations. Whoa, and does anyone want to share? What were some themes that came up as you all were talking? Drew? Here, I'll give you it.
I think for many of us who have grown up in the church, like I grew up Orthodox Christian, and so I feel like a lot of mainstream Christian traditions have overlooked like how bad Abraham actually treated Hagar, and like also gave him a lot of honor for like starting the religion and being like the father of 3 of the most prominent religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so like now as an adult, you know, what he did was actually quite terrible, and he often gets praised for being like such an amazing figure in all 3 traditions. And so I think it's kind of just like a wake-up call to like, oh, you know, what he did wasn't so great, but he's still such a central figure, which I find interesting.
Thanks, Drew. Does anyone else want to share? Oh.
Our group had similar thoughts that, there's a lot of like, yay, he's the greatest guy, and we're like, I don't know about that. And we kind of talked about how even though, we did not in this story, but in like the before story, that there's a lot of masterminding by Sarah. So she's probably more abusive in a way, but he didn't like fight back against her, he kind of went with her plans. So even if you want to make the argument that like, oh, well, he wasn't the main aggressor, it's kind of like, oh, but he was part of it. And so he's just as bad. It's kind of what we talked about.
Thanks, Angel. Yeah, sometimes too we blame all of the women in the story. We're like, oh, Abraham was just kind of doing his best. I was like, nah, that's pretty gross. That's pretty disgusting. Anyone else? One more? No, I do this every week where I ask for one more, and then we always know we're done. Okay. All right. This story is really gross. It's really problematic. If you've been here a year ago, we talked about Hagar, and we talked about her through a womanist lens. So a year ago when we were doing our lenses series, we talked about how there's different theologies that you can look at stories and interpret stories through. So womanism theology that is by Black women and for Black women. Theologians have said, we would love you all to learn from this. So a year ago when we looked at this story, we looked at it through a womanist theologian lens. And we did so about how this is a story of survival, and it mirrors the stories of Black women so much. So that lens is with us as we're looking at this story today, and a huge move that we are doing when we are talking about this story today is Hagar is the hero of our story. She is the center, and that is a very strategic move that we're going to do together as we're wrestling with such a grotesque story. She's the center, and we're going to keep getting into why she's the center. So, there's 2 wilderness scenes we see her in. The first wilderness scene is she's pregnant and she flees to the wilderness. This is at the very beginning. She's pregnant, she's getting abused, she flees to the wilderness in her pregnant, vulnerable body. And by fleeing to the wilderness, she grabs her own agency. And it's in the wilderness, a metaphor for just desolation, right? Of a journey. Where are we going? What's going to happen? It's in the wilderness. She's there, and God speaks to her. So in Genesis 16, God speaks to her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And there's a lot going on there, but God speaks to her, God sees her, and the way that God speaks to her is so resonant to Hagar that she, in response to God, in Genesis 16:13, names God. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roi," for she said, "Have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing God?" El Roi, that Hebrew word, El Roi, means the God who sees me. So it's Hagar in the wilderness, and she says, "God, you see me." This is one of the first signs we know Hagar is just a kick and awesome person, because she is the first person to name God. It is the enslaved Egyptian woman that gives God a name, not Abraham, not the men in power. It is Hagar in the wilderness, the one that has been abused, the one that's marginalized, the one that's displaced from her home. She gives God a name, and it's El Roi, the God who sees me. She is my church mama, more than Father Abraham. No. She's the one that's naming God in the wilderness and prays for it. And in that children's book it says, "And your name is El Roi, the God who sees me. I seen the God who sees me. They took away my name, but you remember me. I was enslaved, but now I'm free." So Hagar in the story, she goes back to the house, and she has Ishmael, her son, and Sarah has her son Isaac. And again, there's a lot of turmoil in this house. It's not a safe place. And Sarah and Abraham kick them out of the house. They're displaced. They're kicked out, and they're back in the wilderness. And in this wilderness 2 scene, in Genesis 21, Hagar is not sure she's going to make it. This story breaks my heart so much, as I'm sure a lot of you are feeling this with me, because of how many people are displaced in the world, in the wilderness, that have experienced so much violence. So she's in the wilderness, and they aren't sure they're going to make it. She doesn't have water. They ran out of food and water. And in the wilderness, in Genesis 21, when the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. She went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And God heard the voice of the boy. The angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." When God opened her eyes, she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. Oh, jeez. This mother, Hagar, and her vulnerable son are in the wilderness. And this story, especially from a womanist lens, is not about liberation, it's about survival. God sees them. God makes a way for them to survive. They have water and they make it. It's a story of them being displaced and God divinely in solidarity with them. It's a story where the belonging that was supposed to be true in Genesis 1 from creation is fractured. But God is saying, no, you still belong. you're surviving in the wilderness, but you still belong. And it's Hagar who names God. Now, I want to talk about God in this story. So in Genesis 1, for those of you that might remember a couple weeks ago, there were 2 Hebrew words to describe God in Genesis 1. One was Elohim. Yeah, well, we have a slide of it. Okay, so Elohim was God creates. That was using, in the beginning, God created. So in the beginning, Elohim created. And that one is very much a universal, plural name of God. We are made in Elohim's image. This very plural, creative, God's almost. And then we also have Ruach, which is the spirit, the feminine of God. When I looked back at this story, I thought it was really interesting what Hebrew words are used to describe God in Hagar's story. So in Genesis 16, we have, in the wilderness scene 1, so she's pregnant there. This is the one where she gives God a name. The name that is used to describe God by the author is Yahweh, which Yahweh, some of us have heard it before, is a kind of classic way to describe God. And Yahweh usually symbolizes covenant. So the covenant, a lot of us, maybe it's as we started, the covenant's all about Abraham and Israel. That's where the covenant is. What's fascinating about this story is in Genesis 16, when Hagar is pregnant and in the wilderness for the first time, Yahweh is the one she names. Yahweh, the God of covenant, is the one who sees her. Yahweh's covenant was not just with Abraham and Sarah. Yahweh's covenant was also with Hagar, the Egyptian slave woman. And then in the second wilderness scene, Genesis 21, the name that's used to describe God by the authors is Elohim, which Elohim, as we know, is about this God who is a part of all creation. It's a very plural, fluid understanding of God. And I find it really fascinating that these are the 2 names that we have for God, that God, it's a covenant God with Hagar, and it's a God of all of creation, not just Israel, not just Abraham and Sarah. That's the God that is active in Hagar's story, and she names God El Roi, the God who sees me. This is a story I come back to very, very frequently because Hagar has become a church mama to me. She's a foundational part of my own spirituality. And looking at this now in the terms of covenant, I find it really interesting, especially in the times we're in. We're in times where people claim that they have God's covenant and that they are God's people. This has happened quite literally with Israel. It's happened in the United States. We are God's people. We are God's chosen ones. We are the special ones. It's happening in politics. I am the one chosen by God to lead this country. There's a lot of people claiming the covenant of God, and there's a lot of men in power exploiting that covenant, saying, I've been chosen by God, here's why, and I'm going to use this power however I want. And there's really no consequence or accountability, as we know with Abraham. What I love about Hagar is she flips the script. God's covenant is with her. God's covenant is with the marginalized. God is with those that have experienced exploitation. God is in solidarity with Hagar. And in such a way that the way that God is described, it expands beyond just Yahweh or just Elohim, but these mergings, that God is the one of covenant and also the one of creation, of all of creation, really breaks the cast and the mold